Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Nick Bullitt, the engagement catalyst here at OneSpirit, and I am sitting here today with Andrew Vidich. You have an upcoming workshop that we're here to speak about, and we are just excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So if you can just start out, share a little bit about your spiritual background and the work that you're currently doing.
My background, I have studied, have a PhD in the transformative methods within all different spiritual traditions with a focus on Sufism. But I've also spent my lifetime working with the dying and in hospice programs, and used to teach a course on death and dying for nurses and people involved in caring for the dying. So I have been involved in this kind of work for a long, long time. I think maybe 45 years, something like that.
Really? What first drew you to that population of death and dying?
Well, the inspiration came from my own spiritual teacher whose name was Sankirpal Singh. And in addition to that, I think you'll find that in most traditions, particularly Buddhism and Hinduism, and to maybe a lesser extent in Christianity and Jainism, Sikhism, that working with the dying is a great preparatory practice for one's own spiritual journey. So all of the different traditions have seen it as a wake-up call, getting us closer to an understanding of the reality of death as we work with the dying, encourages us to face our own death, face our own fears, and really take a hard look at death and what its meaning in our life is.
So what inspired you to create this workshop?
Well, I think what inspired me is my lifelong work with people who have been on the point of transition and trying to understand death from an inner point of view, so that those people who are making the transition, can have a more peaceful, loving, and even joyful transition into the beyond. And actually get a chance to explore what the true meaning of death is. So death is actually one of our greatest teachers, but our society has often relegated it to a back seat or even no seat on the bus. And I think as people begin to grapple with some of these bigger ideas that are present in all traditions, who are we, where do we come from, what happens at the time of death, we can not only catapult ourselves into an understanding of who we are, but we can make the remaining part of our life the most joyful, happy, and blissful, and also to be able to learn how to care for the dying. We all are going to meet people. We're all going to have that opportunity at one point in our life to either be close to someone who's dying. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, we all have to face our own death.
Right.
And we should all be making preparations for that moment. So after all, it's the 100% certainty in your life, guaranteed. And yet it's one of the things that nobody spends any time even thinking about.
Right.
The most obvious, the most profound and greatest voyage we will ever take, and nobody's even thinking about what they're going to do about it. How are they going to deal with that? What kind of a death are they expecting? So all of those things are wrapped into really becoming a more loving, conscious human being.
And so this is a 2-day workshop. What's a typical experience going to be like during the workshop?
We're going to start with understanding what is the reality of death. How do we really look at behind the so-called societal views? We're going to look at some of the psychological states that people encounter on their transition process. We're going to take a look at what actually happens at death's door. What's actually the dissolution of the body and the elements? And if you're a caregiver or if you're going through the process, what can you expect? We're also going to take a look at what do the scriptures say about death and what lies beyond pre-death visions, the nearing death experience, as well as the afterlife of the soul. What do the different traditions tell us? What can we expect from the accounts of not only mystics and saints and seers, but also from the vast repertoire of accounts of people who've had near-death experiences? What does that process actually look like? And then lastly, we're going to talk about how do you make that transition more gracefully. So we're going to look at investigating suffering and our deepest fears around death. Not only death itself, but the fear of the dying process. We're going to take a look at all that. Completing our journeys, forgiveness of other people. So these are some of the things. After that, we're going to talk about what death teaches us about living now.
Right.
So there's a multitude of different experiences that we can garner from not only watching people die and understanding them, but what can we learn about making our life in the here and now as beautiful and as loving and as conscious as possible. We're going to look at the power of love to heal. So we're all on a healing journey, and what is the ultimate role? What is the ultimate voyage that we're all taking? What is the role that love plays in that journey?
Is there anything in the workshop that touches upon grief?
Absolutely. That's actually the biggest challenge, is that people are not prepared for dying. But that's because they're not prepared for living. People fear death because we fear life, because we haven't investigated our own deep grief, our own places where we haven't forgiven ourselves and other people. And so what happens at the last moment is all of this backload of grief starts to erupt. And it is an eruption that we have no control over if we don't deal with it beforehand. And so dealing with grief now is really the secret to dealing with grief then. As we take a look at all of these different aspects, we're going to take a look at what can we do now to be more loving, conscious human beings.